In 1917, a new silent film was released with an extremely unsubtle plotline. The Black Stork follows a young couple who marry and have a baby in defiance of warnings from the film's hero, Dr. Dickey, that the couple will pass on the father's, quote, hereditary taint. Sure enough, when they do have a child, it is born, quote, defective in the language of the film and in need of life-saving intervention, which the doctor refuses to provide. The mother, having doubts, embarks on a mental journey, exploring the life that her defective baby would grow up to lead, and watches as he suffers through a miserable existence, culminating in his choice to murder Dr. Dickey for the crime of letting him live. The mother then awakens from her reverie and agrees with the doctor that her child should, in fact, be murdered. At the close of the film, we watch as Jesus receives the baby's soul, a difficult but moral and righteous choice having been made to kill the infant rather than condemn him and his offspring and the race at large to a polluting of the blood pool. Some pretty sick shit, right? Well, pay attention, because as with other ugly, discredited ideologies which have bubbled back to the surface in this era, eugenics is back. The language, the tactics, the mechanics may be tailored for the modern age, but make no mistake, from Silicon Valley to DC to social media to pop culture, a new eugenics movement has arrived, and it is every bit as morally repugnant and anti-creation as the OG version. The New York Times' Ross Douthat recently hosted a high-flying young tech founder who has secured Peter Thiel funding to explain her company's offerings. Called Orchid, the company and its founder Noor Siddiqui promised parents the ability to design a healthy child through sophisticated embryo testing and selection tech. These couples go through a process of IVF, have each of the created embryos tested, and receive a detailed breakdown of the genetic makeup of each one of the embryos. Orchid is but one of a number of startups in the field offering the similar embryo testing services. Another Thiel-backed startup, Nucleus Genomics, specifically tests embryos for high IQ, hair color, eye color, left-handedness, likelihood for obesity, and a whole range of potential health outcomes. As for Orchid, it is rumored to include on its client list the richest man on the planet, Elon Musk. It is increasingly popular in Silicon Valley, and according to Siddiqui, has already worked with thousands of parents. Now, I would recommend listening to this entire interview, but I was particularly struck by Siddiqui's explanation of the inspiration for her work and how it kind of eerily echoes some of the plotline of The Black Stork.
So growing up, my mom got a pretty devastating diagnosis. She started by losing her night vision. Then she lost her peripheral vision, and then slowly she started losing her central vision. So she ended up getting diagnosed with a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. So what that means is that you sort of progressively go blind. And it was a pretty long odyssey to actually get that diagnosis. And then there was a lot of fear around, okay, is that going to affect, her siblings, my aunts and uncles? Is it going to affect us or children? And, really kind of what I was obviously very young when a lot of this was happening.
How old was she when this sort of manifested itself?
So I think the first symptoms that I think she had admitted to, at least, my dad, were probably in her early 30s. And then I think maybe in her mid 30s is when kind of he pushed her enough to be like, hey, I think this is something that, you should really be, looking into. And I think that, really what, sat with me and left, and what I felt through that experience was just this sort of profound unfairness, right? This idea that, there's this genetic lottery that's unfolding and some people win and some people lose, and through no fault of their own, someone who I love, bitterly, isn't going to be able to enjoy the things like, being able to, see her grandkids and, just things that I think, you and I take for granted that, hey, we're going to be able to see into old age.
So just to be really clear here, if Siddiqui's grandparents had been able to avail themselves of Orchid's technology, they would have been able to select from a range of embryos of varying characteristics and likely would have discarded the one with the genetic markers for this adult onset blindness. In other words, the embryo, which would have grown to be Siddiqui's mom, would have been destroyed after having been labeled defective. Reminiscent of the doctor in Black Stork, Siddiqui presents this as a moral choice that would have saved her mother and their family from the pain of grappling with her blindness and the possibility that future generations may also inherit this condition.
If I took the trays of embryos that contain you and your husband's embryonic children and I threw them in the river, what kind of crime have I committed? Have I committed a property crime? Like, should I pay a fine? Like, what have I done?
I think that the question of, okay, an embryo that is going to get adult onset blindness, what do I think about that embryo? My mom doesn't want to be blind. She doesn't want me to be blind. She doesn't want her grandkids to be blind. So I think that it is a positive moral choice. It is the responsible decision as a parent to detect that risk at the earliest possible stage and to, transfer the embryo that has the best probability of a healthy life. I don't think that there's any moral question there. I think almost the opposite. I think that creating stigma or creating some sort of taboo around the idea that parents would want to proactively get that information is a dangerous idea to propagate.
Okay.
No moral question and a dangerous idea to propagate. Pretty interesting. Of course, selecting to guard against a medical condition, that's one thing. Custom designing a super race is quite another. Any guess what trait Silicon Valley types are most interested in selecting for? According to the Wall Street Journal, tech executives are shelling out big bucks for designer high IQ babies. Their article titled "Inside Silicon Valley's Growing Obsession with Having Smarter Babies" details the way that tech executives are increasingly spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to avail themselves of orchid-type tech in an effort to guarantee high IQ offspring. Some are also spending hundreds of thousands on high-end matchmakers who can pair them with high-achieving Ivy League mates in hopes of passing on these intellectual genetic blessings. A statistical geneticist from Harvard Medical School explained to the Wall Street Journal this fascination with what is being styled genetic optimization. Let's go ahead and put this quote up on the screen. They say, "I think they have a perception that they are smart and they are accomplished, and they deserve to be where they are because they have, quote, good genes. Now they have a tool where they think that they can do the same thing in their kids as well, right?" Now, if that is not the definition of a eugenics mindset, I don't know what is. Specifically, the ideology that some genes are good and some genes are bad, therefore some people are innately superior and deserving of certain privileges vis-a-vis their genetically inferior brethren. This type of thinking is currently coursing through the body politic right now in a variety of forms. Now, the original eugenics movement combined anti-immigrant fervor over fear that other races would degrade the white American WASP stock with a progressive era zest for radical reform. Support for eugenic policies like forced sterilization, it was actually concentrated in the well-off, educated, sophisticated circles, kind of like Silicon Valley. Now, the movement itself was also fomented at a time of great change as the Industrial Revolution concentrated wealth and transformed the population from rural to urban. You can see some of these same strands coming together right now as Elon Musk and his obsession with birth rates and spreading his allegedly high IQ seed finds common cause with the racial nativist obsessives, people like Stephen Miller, who I don't have to tell you has a lot of power. Now, when white nationalist Stephen Miller cautions against importing the third world, he is asserting that people who come from developing nations aren't poor because of their geography or because of the poverty they were born into, but because of their inherently, immutably inferior genetics. When Trump warns about immigrants, quote, poisoning the blood of the nation, he's engaging in that same sort of genetic essentialism. Such views are given full-throated endorsement among increasingly influential racist influencers, people like Nick Fuentes. Here he is explaining to Candace Owens his view that Black people are inherently genetically inferior.
So I'm trying to understand if you think that it's all Black people are like this, or if your world is kind of colored by this is what's going on in America. This has failed for 1,000 reasons. Welfarism has definitely, Black people in 1940s, stand up. My grandfather, I talk about that denigration and the corrosion of culture. Yeah. That's happening. White, Black, whatever you want to name it, there is this intentional corrosion of culture. So do you think it's literally, well, this is just what a Black person is when they come out? Or do you think that post-welfare, LBJ, Great Society, this is what Black Americans have become, and I have a right to respond to that and say that as a white man, I don't want to live there?
Well, I think it's more nature than people would like to believe. There's this classic tension of, is it nature, is it nurture, is it cultural, or is it intrinsic, is it racial? And I've always been on the latter side of this among conservatives. Conservatives like to say it's all culture. Black America is the way it is because of hip hop music and the Great Society and that kind of stuff. And I think the uncomfortable reality is a big part of it is intrinsic. One of the big arguments against the abolition of slavery in the 1860s is that, when Europeans colonized Africa, they hadn't discovered the wheel. There's no two-story buildings. There's no writing. There's no written language. Missionaries had to go to Africa in the last century and invent it for the African people because there's no recorded history. They didn't have writing. In sub-Saharan Africa, and Europeans did not penetrate that until late 19th century, they didn't have any of this. To the extent that you have infrastructure in Africa, it's from the Muslims in the Sahel, in the Maghreb, in northern Africa, where the Arabs colonized. And then you had, Carthage and Egypt, you had ancient civilizations. But sub-Saharan Africa, they didn't have that. You take these people out of that land and put them here, and they're enslaved people. You let them free in a modern, liberal republic, they're not going to succeed. It's not going to go well for them. And that was one of the arguments against abolition. People said if you free them without any assimilation, without any kind of process for them to be acclimated, they're going to die. And that's exactly what happened. Many of the bottom 10% of the lowest IQ Africans just died off for generations. And it had pardon the expression, but it had a eugenic effect because over time, if the weakest are dying off, that's one argument for why blacks in America have a standard deviation higher IQ than the blacks in sub-Saharan Africa.
All right, let me spend a little bit of time on that because that is all utter and complete garbage. So the data over time actually tells a story of black IQ scores consistently closing the gap with those of whites in America. This would not be possible if black people are just inherently immutably inferior forever and always. Data also shows an exceptional record of achievement among black immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa and Africa in general. Specifically, Nigerian immigrants as a population have the highest college attainment of any ethnic subgroup in the entire country. Not to mention, to flatten all of Africa or even all of sub-Saharan Africa into a single race is in and of itself complete and utter nonsense. Africa is the single most genetically diverse continent on the planet. Now, I'm not saying nature is irrelevant when it comes to characteristics like IQ, but Fuentes seems to dismiss nurture altogether. Maybe the clearest example to debunk this nonsense comes from countries like South Korea, which experienced rapid economic development, lifting much of their population out of poverty. Lo and behold, average IQ in South Korea went from below 90 to above 105 in just 2 generations, an impossibility if IQ was primarily genetically determined and immutable. Asians in general, let's keep in mind, were once stereotyped as inherently unintelligent. Now they're kicking white people's asses so hard in college admissions that we have to rig the selection process just to keep some white diversity on elite college campuses. Not to mention, I hate to break it to these people, some of the most dysfunctional morons I have ever met are high IQ. This somewhat bullshit indicator is famously piss poor at actually predicting life success. However, as we barrel towards an AI future where jobs are scarce, wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few trillionaires, and the stakes of making it into the global elite may be the difference between unending wealth and unending misery, it's not hard to see where all of this could ultimately lead us. Obviously, we already see a crackdown on immigration, which is often overtly sold in the name of racial purity. It's the exact same dynamic that we saw in the run-up to the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924, which was explicitly crafted by eugenicists based on their junk science of which races were more or less inferior. This time around, I don't think we're likely to get forced sterilization laws, at least I don't think so, to block the quote-unquote defective from procreating. Instead, the modern version is going to be driven by the logic of the market. An arms race by those with the means to secure their child's spot in the elite class that can pay to insulate themselves from the ravages of wars, climate crisis, and whatever AI has in store for all of us. If Black Stork, that film I started with, served as pro-eugenics propaganda, the 1997 film Gattaca provides the high-tech eugenics cautionary tale that rings far too true given the innovations of companies like Orchid. In Gattaca, genetic perfectionism and discrimination leads to an impossibly rigid and dystopian class structure where those children who were born via the genetic privilege of orchid-like tech lord over the poor untouchables who were birthed the old-fashioned way with all of the genetic risk that that mode entails. Orchid's founder, in that interview with Ross, if you watch all of it, she talks about freedom, she talks about choice, she talks about quote-unquote genetic privilege. She uses the language of progressivism to push a vision of the world in which we are all flattened into good genes and bad genes, defective and perfected. And humans are handed one more way to divide each other up into worthy and unworthy. Then again, maybe the joke will be on all the IQ-obsessed elite after AI takes over the intellectual jobs, and all of us overeducated smarty pants types are left wishing we'd learned how to be a plumber. Saagar, I'm curious for your thoughts on, you watched the whole interview, right?
Yeah, I did. I agree with you there.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show, ad-free, and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.